I'm going to quickly touch on the gap. What is the gap? The gap is the difference between yours and the other party's offers, so their ideal outcome and what's actually possible. And the ideal outcomes, they can send mixed signals about what's realistic in terms of a resolution. So be very careful about these. It can create an artificial impasse if you open too high, because beware, there might be backlash, and it might risk any ongoing relationship, or there might be a storm out. So in order to be able to reduce the gap and avoid protracted litigation, you first need to understand it. So you've got to consider what both sides, so both yours and the other party's best alternatives and worst alternatives to a negotiated outcome looks like. So they're the backup plans and the worst case scenarios. And you look at these to try and assess what that zone of possible agreement looks like. The stronger the backup plan, then often they've got the strongest negotiating power at the table. So the first step in any negotiation is to ask yourself and your client, what will you do if it doesn't resolve? And then the next is, what will they do if it doesn't resolve? And then the third is, what's yours or their walk away point? So keeping those questions in mind. Remember, a best alternative to a negotiated outcome is not what you or they think is fair. It is the reality that you or they will face if there's no deal. So you should look beyond yours to what their best alternative is as well, so you can appreciate how to reach a compromise and close the gap. This information will give you the outside perimeters of a possible deal, and helps you also decide when to accept an offer or when to walk away, and whether you've got to the point of that zone of possible agreement or not, or whether you need to keep negotiating. So these need to be continuously reevaluated throughout the negotiations as you learn more about the other party's needs and motivations. Also, another thing to be aware of is the anchoring effect. This is caused by often the first offer. Interestingly, many people are reluctant to be the first to open negotiations by making an offer. I hear often, no, I'm not going to make the first offer. Now, thought on this is divided. Some say I'd never would. Hearing from the other party first gives me valuable information. But others that go first say, well, then I get to take control of the dialogue. And look, there is no right or wrong answer. It depends in every situation. But there is well-known cognitive bias in negotiation that first offer has an anchoring effect. And there's more common tendency to almost give too much weight to that first number that's put forward and then adjust from that starting point. So keep that in mind when making offers. It might be that if you put forward, say, a draft agreement too, that also has a big impact, because people think, oh, well, much of the hard work's done, let's work off that platform as a base. So this is particularly useful where another party is uncertain about the correct or fair appropriate outcome. And if you think the other party has no, real sense of what would be a possibility, then putting forward the first offer may give you the better tactical advantage. Sometimes there are situations where it's better that the other party make the first move, and that might be where you don't have enough information at the moment up your sleeve and you don't want to prematurely make a first offer because it could be costly. And could cut you out of a better deal, limiting your zone of possible agreement. So if you don't have enough information at hand, then that would be a situation when you might consider holding back on being the first to put an offer forward. Okay, it's a fine balance, clearly, any negotiation. All of these things are just simply information for you to keep in mind when you're negotiating. So here are some strategies for you to use to close the gap. I'm not going to go through every one of them, but to use technology to your advantage. So obviously, if you can't meet in person, use conferencing tools. Shift the focus. So if someone else drops the first anchor or offer and it's too high or low, then just simply move the focus away from that offer, so that then you don't dwell on it. Try to get them to think of other issues rather than on that offer. If you keep pushing them to explain the offer, it only gives it more power. Be curious and probe to find out what you don't know. Sometimes new information can help close the gap on the negotiation. Explain your offer when you can. I think that's also very helpful. Reframing, so framing your words. So be very careful how you speak, if you can, when you're communicating an offer, because it can generate very different outcomes. For example, if you say, I want $5,000 rent for the shop, as opposed to, I can rent you the shop for $5,000. You'll get a different response. The first, you sound like you're going to take, whereas the other is you're giving and you're offering. So reciprocate. Make sure you spell out anything that you're going to reciprocate, because if you do this, it creates a sense of mirroring or a willingness to meet them along the way, and that will often be something that they will then try to do in return. Consider contingent concessions. So, you might say, well, I'll extend your contract for a longer period of time if you do a price adjustment along the way. Look for mutual gains. So where you might be able to save face. I saw a really interesting mediation recently where there was a debtor that actually had no liquidity, so no money to pay the creditor. And they were of a culture that they were really concerned they were going to lose face if they were sued, but also if they went bankrupt, it was going to be very ugly for them, both personally, reputational as well, and culturally. And in the end, one of the proposals that was considered was a very creative one, whereby there was an asset that was real estate that, although it had lost significant value being an apartment during the pandemic, instead of going through a buy-sell type scenario, there was the discussions around a transfer of that asset over to the creditor, which then would have been out of the public eye and therefore able to obtain this face saving that was requisite for the debtor. So that showed a really creative outcome for mutual gain. I've seen it again and again, actually. Another one where years ago, when I was litigator, my clients had sold a business and hadn't provided accurate figures of the business, and that was before my involvement, I have to say. And anyway, they sold the business and they were being sued because of these figures that the purchaser had relied upon. And my clients were extremely anxious about, again, this being in the public eye and be potentially out there in the community. And so privately, they bought back the business from the purchasers. So again, thinking of these creative options. You can package optional offers as well. Options A and B are awesome, particularly when you're trying to work out, well, what do they really want? Do they want to stay or do they want to go? So if you put forward two options of one where they stay, one where they go, by way of example, then you can test the waters and see which one they really want. Consider negotiating issues simultaneously. Sometimes this is good because you can then see the importance of each issue as it becomes apparent along the way, or where flexibility may lie, but other times it can just simply confuse things. So yeah, be careful using that one. Seeking out differences as well. So, it's important to look for common ground, but also have a look at what differences there are, so that you can perhaps reconcile or overcome the differences by seeking out different ways to create value. So all of these things invite collaborative problem solving and options exploration as well. Consider the context of the relationship. What type of relationship exists? Is that relationship at stake depending on how I negotiate? Does it matter? Are reputations at stake? So don't lose sight of the fact that your tactics could affect the relationship at hand. If it's important, the relationship, then Your goal should not be just about getting the best possible deal. It should be also about how you can do that while preserving the relationship or strengthening it even. Again, as I said, if you need to adjourn the discussions or change the lineup, all of these things are very helpful in breaking an impasse. The take-homes for today, I think, really are set that tone. Don't forget about the importance of doing that so you can move towards a learning conversation. Be curious and look for ways to be creative and foster a collaborative problem-solving space. Your client won't thank you for years of litigation like they will if you can achieve a commercial outcome efficiently and effectively on. But last but not least is remember that your parting words matter. So particularly in cases where there's an ongoing relationship or a chance of overlap down the track, finishing the conversation by saying, look, I know that this negotiation or today was tough and we all put our heads together and worked really hard. And everyone should be commended for doing that. Okay, so a tough negotiation that ends with some positive words can alter the way the negotiation is remembered by the other party, but also by your client. And this very basic step can be a long-term investment for your client and for you. Okay, so thank you for your time today. If you have any questions that you've been unable to ask because today's session was recorded, please feel free to pick up the phone or shoot me an email. I'm more than happy to answer any questions you may have. Thanks again for your time.